This particular video's focus really is more for the black community, but could actually be applied to the Hispanic community, the Asian community, and even to a small extent the white community. To my black brothers and sisters, if you want to see a whole lot more of this, and I mean our children with smiles on their faces, with the ability to grow and prosper, in my opinion, you need to see a whole lot less of this. Folks, we need to do something. And the something we need to do is to take our destinies, well, actually take control of our destinies. As a person that I respect consistently says, control your dollar and know your history. And the history of the group that you see before you is a history of oppression, racism, and basically just straight out murder. Now we need to do something to confront this. And since we are living under a racist system, we're going to have very little choice but to operate within the system. So I have a couple of suggestions. Number one, we need to form our own community security force. Now this force would be paid for, and the people that would be part of this force should have some form of peace officer status, preferably with a military training, but not necessarily. The members of this community security force should either be members of the community or be people with ties to the community. None of this, I gotta drive an hour to go to work as a member of a security force, because at the end of my shift, all I'm going to turn around and do is get in my car and drive an hour away. So I really don't have a specific tie to the community. Now, once we are able to get this force established, instead of that first call being to the police department when help is required, that community security force should get that first call. They should be trained for immediate response, and when necessary, and only when necessary, an assigned representative from that community security force would deal with the police initially. That cuts down on the interaction of the police with people of color in our communities. So less interaction means less fatalities. Obviously, when real criminal activity occurs, that would and should be handled by the police. But I'm talking about uses of deadly force, shots being fired, things of that nature. And where they would be immediately called and interact with our community really should be defined. That community security force would be the people in charge of community relations between us and the police. That force would and should have the names of all officers employed within their particular police department, and they should be the ones to develop relationships with the management of the police department in order for there to be clear lines of communication. And again, that in itself would and should cut down on fatalities within our community. Police should not be, I repeat, should not be initially involved with calls for help unless absolutely necessary. So if there's a person with a mental disorder that requires help, it should be the community security force that's called, and they should be trained to respond to that situation. I'm so tired of hearing people calling the police for help with a mentally challenged person and the police end up killing that person. Totally unnecessary. That community security force should be able to establish hotlines in order for criminal activity to be anonymously reported and in turn relayed out to the police after the community security force does its own initial investigation. And I'm not talking about an investigation over months or even weeks. If possible, it should be limited to no more than 24 to 48 hours to be able to assess the situation, arrive at a reasonable conclusion, and then refer it to the proper body. Folks, we need to vote. We need to vote in order to get people into positions that are willing to help us, not to work against us. Now, here's a radical thought, and I don't think that it'll ever happen, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. That police defense, I was in fear for my life, should no longer be a valid excuse without other evidence that basically substantiates that fear for the officer's life. If these police officers, with all the training that they supposedly have, are in such fear for their lives every time they come across a black male or even a black female, such as in the case of Charlena Lyles, or a black child, they don't need to have that job. Plain and simple. And I believe that if the people put a ballot measure in, basically codifying that particular position, you may have a few fewer police officers, but those officers will know that they will be held accountable. Now, we got major issues here, folks. And in my opinion, a lot of these so-called public servants are not actually public servants. They're in this thing solely for a paycheck, and they are, I'm not even saying unwilling to accept any risk whatsoever. They are unwilling to accept any perceived but unreal risk. So anytime they see anything out of the ordinary, they immediately go into scared mode and react accordingly. Now, the system we're in basically classifies black males, or black people in general, and even other minorities, as the enemy. And in my opinion, what I think is happening is they are attempting to take all of the little bit of power that we have away from us. And their best case scenario is none of us will have the right to vote. And you could see those actions being put into effect in places like North Carolina and Texas. Gerrymandering is becoming an art form in order to reduce whatever small amount of potential voting power that we have. And they are gearing up like crazy and partnering with the private prison industry. And in doing that, those cells and beds need to be filled. And who's the easiest target out there? That would be people of color. So if you know anything about our justice system, you know that we are prosecuted for the same offenses in much sterner matters than white counterparts. When we are found guilty, we are given much harsher sentences than our white counterparts. And we have very little recourse in order to be able to reclaim our lives. The current prison system, for the most part, does little to rehabilitate anyone who actually is guilty of a crime. And the stigma of being convicted of a crime follows most people for the rest of their lives, which limits the educational opportunities, the housing opportunities, the right to life opportunities that a person has. Now, if you are convicted of a crime, you can get that crime, for the most part, unless it's murder, expunged from your record. But that costs money. It costs a lot of money. And it also depends on the state that you live in, if they have a program that will allow that to happen. So for the most part, black people are not able to take advantage of that particular loophole that the justice system in some places does allow. Folks, I stated it before, I'll state it again. We need to take control of our own destinies. We need to keep the police out of our daily lives as much as possible. Realize that when you call the police, you may not be calling for help. You may be calling for a coroner.